With the starting sphere, I used various tools to get the shape that I wanted and edit the object. So the standard tool I used initially, because it was the first tool that was available to me, and I used it to kind of dip in the eyes and get the eye sockets, as well as some other kind of skin texture, but I smoothed that down as well by holding shift. And then I also used the clay build-up tool to kind of etch in any marks that I want, or the move tool to really get the shape of the whole head. I looked at the side profile of my image and really compared it to the reference and tried to get all of the lines exactly the same. So I was pulling it about, using the move tool a lot, and just getting the shape, but then when I went to the front, I got this effect, and it, as you can see, it stretched out the face extremely wide and much bigger than I wanted it. So I had to go in and I had to re-edit bits of the face, so also using the damn standard tool to kind of make those dips look deeper. And then when I need, I would be using Dynamesh to retopologize all of the mesh, because in these tiny gaps like the mouth, the mesh would sometimes become inconsistent. So Dynamesh helps to keep the density the same across the whole thing. So I use clay build-up for the lips a lot, to try and get them out, but I'm also masking maybe one lip and unmasking another lip so that I can move one closer to the other to kind of get that overlapping effect, to try and replicate my reference's mouth. By just blocking out the shape and form, I'm conceptualizing what I want my model to look like. After gradual research into how the software works and getting a better understanding, I was able to move my save file flow from doing projects to saving as tools in ZBrush, and this meant that my work takes less time to save, mainly because it's not saving the history when I save it as a tool, and the history takes up a lot of space. Each time I would make any major edits, I would have to assess the whole model and work on it accordingly. Also, after doing a prototype model in ZBrush, but on a different face, so the one that I did before, I was able to evaluate that and assess where I believed I could improve, both in the method and the outcome that I got. When working on my actual model, I worked in a low resolution in Dynamesh, which is comparable to a low subdivision that ZBrush you might know. So I gradually increased my resolution when it would become a limit to the amount of detail I wanted at the time, and this allowed me to iteratively go through and edit my face at the certain levels of detail that I wanted to. Here I'm using a large brush with the move tool to really shape the face and kind of get the overall shape of the face matching the reference. And I also use the transpose tool or the transpose line to try and get something like how I want my face to be, but it's a bit weird, and I do eventually get it right. I do start on making the ear in the place that I want it to be in comparison to my reference, but when I get to the earlobes especially, the mesh does get really horrible and start losing its volume. So this did make me cautious of it, and as in the final project, it's notable. You can definitely see that the ears and the mesh is a bit not so good around there. I use the transpose tool on the ears because I noticed that they're at the wrong angle in relation to the rest of the face. So this allows me to just give them a better angle and then also merge that back down into the whole skull. With no subdivisions active as well, I'm able to use the mirror and weld tool to merge back one side onto the other in case I make any mistakes, which I've done a couple times, because if I accidentally turn off symmetry, it can mean that my face isn't symmetrical, but mirror and weld helps fix that issue. To work on the eyes, I started by drawing out my eyelids with the clay build-up tool, because it's got the right shape of a brush that I want to kind of make those eyelids, and I use maybe some of the damp standard to make some creases in the face. I pull over the eyebrows down to overlap the eyes or the eyelids, and it kind of gives the effect. It puts the facial shape into play with my model. And I also mask some of the eyes some of the time when I want to change the eyelids without changing the eye. I experiment with the clay tool to try and get the blotchiness in the skin in some areas. You can see I try and make depth in the skin and give it some flesh-like volume with this tool, with this brush, sorry. Each time I come into ZBrush, I sometimes use some different preview materials to really see where the lighting is being reflected and refracted on my character's face. That way I can really get a scope of where I'm going wrong or not. By masking certain areas, such as the outside of the nose I'm able to pull the nostrils out without affecting the rest of the face. By holding the Alt key when using the dam standard tool, I'm able to get an effect which is more sharp than the normal standard tool, but in reverse to the dam, which I used on the bridge of the nose to try and get a effect that really shows off the shape of that nose. I came back to edit the back of the head quite a lot to try and get the shape that I wanted, because it was really annoying me a lot of the time when it just overall wasn't looking the right shape. I etch out where the eyes would be with the clay tool once I get further in, because I've seen other artists use methods of adding the eyes as a separate subtool. So I go for that approach and etch out the eye sockets with the clay build-up tool in reverse, and then I make some edits to the rest of the face and the eyebrows to kind of bring them down and really get that look that I want. So to make the eyes, I first append a sphere to my scene and scale it with the transpose line to the right size and put it right where I want it in the right hand eye socket. Then I edit the face sculpt appropriately, and I just wrap it around the eye without merging the two, so that there's no smooth transition between the two, because I want the eye to be separate from the eye socket. After appending the sphere for the eye, I realised I wasn't in symmetrical mode for some of my editing to the mesh, so I fixed that with a mirror and weld as mentioned before, and then I etched out some of the face with the clay tool to really get the defined edges that I want. I do use the transpose line quite frequently on certain parts of the face, because I want their proportions to be right in relation to my reference, and then I use the smooth tool again by holding shift with any brush, and I just blend that into the surface. By using the trim curve, I first have a go at experimenting with making the back of my head, of my character's head, sorry, the shape that I want, because I'd had the inconsistencies before by making it like not smooth or wasn't really as round as I wanted, so I thought appending a sphere and getting the right shape was the right idea. In the first attempt that I did, I didn't quite keep the sphere round and made it oblong shaped well, and I cut it up and stretched it about, which resulted in not really the effect that I wanted on the back of the head. After I do play around with it for a long time, I eventually do merge it down into the face mesh, and then I have a go at blending it with the smooth tool into the head, and the result just isn't the shape that I want. So I load up a previous save before I cut off the top of the head, well, after I cut it off, and have another go with a fresh look on the model, because it would be after another session. This time I really append that sphere and keep it the spherical shape that I want it to be, and match it with the lines that are already on the skull. I make some angled cuts on the sides because there are planes on the side of your head, so, and that would be where like the ears lie, so when I place my mesh back into the top of the forehead at the back, it kind of matches how the rest of the face does look. I also use another trim curve to, of course, chop that top half so that it doesn't overlay over the eye sockets or anything that I don't want. And I check the poly groups, and because I've used trim curve, and just make sure I put them how I want them to be. After merging the correct head shape that I want on the top, I have two separate poly groups for that back of the head and the rest of the face. Then I merge them together and use the clay tool a bit to add some volume to the planes. But after that I start working on the ears more, and I really use the standard tool to kind of get the curves in the ears that you have. By looking at some images of the anatomy while I'm working, I kind of add in how the neck should be, because you can't really see it in my reference image, but by looking at some basic human anatomy I kind of get those shapes in, but I do merge them down to make them a lot lighter as they're not seen in my reference. I notably use the pinch tool on the edge of my mouth for my character, and this just closes the gaps to really give the effect of the mouth closing at the edges. And then I go on to do other parts of the face with all the other tools that I've been learning. I actually have worked on the asymmetry here at this point, and I've cut off maybe slightly parts of the right hand side ear to get some effect that I want, and I started to add skin pores because it really makes it look realistic with the skin pores in place. Once I do feel I'd finished at this point, I know that I have to Z-remesh my work and project it to my original high poly mesh so that I can make a low poly version with less than 8,000 polys as determined in the brief. After realising the low poly wasn't exactly what I wanted, and the high poly which was related to it and came from it after Z-remeshing and projecting back up to the high poly version, lost some detail. So I went back and I started to just work on the face again before exporting it. Firstly, I went back and decided to add a mouth bag because I'd seen that in a video by Marko Pavlovich, where it can help to, it adds the poly group and makes the mouth look more realistic, but I know it can also be used in animation standards where the mouth is now able to open because there's the big gap that makes the mouth rather than just a visually closed effect. I then go about the rest of my face and start to use the mask by polygroups or polygroup by masks function. So I mask out the inside of the eyes, make that a polygroup, mask out around the eyes, make that a polygroup. I go underneath the chin and make a separate polygroup for the nose, and I also give the ears a separate polygroup, and the back of the ears a separate polygroup. And the reason I'm doing this is so that when I do Z-remesh the model again, this time I can set the quads that are generated to follow the lines of my masks, and this gives me some topology on the front of my face, which is more like the traditional retopology of a normal human face. So by using methods that I'd learned from, for example in this case, Marko Pavlovich's videos, I can get the effect that I want when I remesh my face and bring it down to a much lower poly size. In this one I bring it down to 6,900 polys from the 2 million almost, and it is able to get the detail back by taking that low poly mesh, subdividing it, then projecting that to an old duplicate of the high detail mesh and repeating that process a few times until I have 5 subdivisions or so. After I've made my mesh how I want it to be, but this time with subdivisions, I then go in and I add the asymmetry again, because this was from an old save, before I did the asymmetry and skin pores. So I go in and I add the asymmetry and slight detail like the inflation on the left hand side of the nose and eventually the skin pores as well. But I also make sure to make the wrinkles in the forehead how they actually look in my reference, as the right side is more bulged than the left with the forehead, and I just get the effect I want by using various tools like standard and damp standard to put in those wrinkles or those bulges. To create the skin pores, what I do is I take the clay build-up tool and I give it an alpha of some dots, and I make it a spray shaped like brush method, and that means that I can get some skin pores that look quite realistic.